Welcome back to Story Time with Chris James. I will now pick up right where I left off last week. Pam was laying on her back on what looked like a table from an industrial kitchen. Just in front of her was a huge stove with a pot as big as a bathtub. The lid was on, but steam was coming from all around the edges. The Greys were all making a mad dash for the nearest exit. Pam was about to jump down from the table when something, came walking in. It was not as tall as the Nordics, but it looked a lot bigger. The thing was 6.5 feet tall, bright green. Its eyes stuck out on either side of its head and looked to have hundreds of pupils. The head was triangular with a tiny mouth. Both arms looked as if they had an extra joint. The hands were more like claws. The chest area wasn't all that spectacular to look at. Long and skinny, this thing needed to work on that upper body strength a lot more, maybe do some bench presses. The lower part of the body was huge with little spindly legs, 4 of them. The thing looked at Pam and licked its lips. "Gut Sie schauen, Fräulein Bogus. Sind Sie hungern, ja?" It lifted the lid of the giant pot and took a huge sniff. "Lecker, ja?" It turned back towards Pam and licked its lips again, along with both eyeballs. Pam looked around for a weapon, anything to defend herself against this giant girl-eating bug. Or was it a mantis? "Oopsies! You no sprechen Sie Deutsch." It scratched the side of its head with one claw. "US speaking Sie English, ja?" It bobbed its head, agreeing with itself. Pam was so startled by this one-sided conversation, she stopped looking for weapons. Yes, yes, I speak English." "Ja, es goody. I know many good English words." A smile came across its tiny mouth. "Here, I make you not so scaredy cat." It rummaged in a cabinet and pulled something out. It set the object on its head. Now the giant mantis had on a blonde wig with 2 braids. They hung down either side of its triangular head. "There, much good, ja?" The mantis walked back to the steaming pot and lifted the lid. Grabbing a ladle, it began scooping out some thick liquid and dumping it into a bowl. The bowl was then shoved into Pam's hands. The mantis dropped a spoon into the bowl, splashing brown liquid down the front of Pam's pajamas. Pam looked from the mantis to the bowl and back. As she watched, the mantis ladled more liquid into a second bowl and began wolfing it down. "It's good, ja?" the mantis said around a mouthful of food. Pam took a tentative sniff. It didn't smell too bad, but she was hesitant to eat just anything, especially anything a giant bug thought was good eats. A second sniff smelled a lot like beef stew. And not wishing to offend her host, that just might kill her, Pam used the spoon to rummage around until she found a piece of what should be meat. She took a nibble. Well, it tasted like meat. It went down without too much trouble. "US looking for Sam Cassavetes, ja?" "You found him." The mantis banged the side of the pot with its spoon. Pam nearly choked trying to get the meat back up out of her stomach. "Ha ha! Est humor coming at ya. I am making the joke, ja?" The mantis made a clicking sound with its mouth. Pam felt as if she were about to pass out. She had to take several deep breaths before the room stopped spinning. You English love a good joke, yeah? The mantis made more of that clicking sound. It then held the bowl up to its mouth and shoveled everything in. Slamming the bowl down on the counter, the mantis wiped its mouth with one claw. Pam looked in her bowl but couldn't even begin to eat, just in case. Come, we looking for Sam. Maybe in warehouse, no? The giant bug began to scurry along the floor on its four legs as it headed for the door. Pam had absolutely no intention of following the creature, but she was supposed to be looking for a missing human, and she wasn't seeing him anywhere in the kitchen. She jumped down from the counter, which was higher than she had expected. She had to nearly run to catch up with the bug. Um, what do I call you? If I need to, that is, just asking. Most must address me as Frau Schlammhauer. The mantis did a kind of a curtsy maneuver. With four legs, it looked very strange. Not as if everything looked strange right now. But we are good friends now, ja? You must be calling me Gretchen. You're a female, then? The words were out before Pam could think. Ja, can't you tell? Gretchen held up her braids and did a little shoulder shrug. The clicking sound came from her mouth. As the door opened, the sound of polka music filled the air. Pam watched as dozens of giant bugs went scuttling by. When Frau Schlamhauer stepped out into the corridor, the others all came to a halt and bowed in her direction. Gretchen began to walk along, holding one claw up and turning it slightly, like she was the Queen of England or something. Come in, mein friend. Much to see and little time. Pam felt very exposed as she walked by dozens of giant bugs, all looking as if they wanted to eat her. She hoped that was just how they looked. Not to worry your little head. They enjoy seeing you. Gretchen walked on as if in a hurry. Frau Schlamhauer stopped in front of a very big set of doors that could have accommodated an 18-wheeler or two. This is warehouse. Gretchen began to punch at the keypad next to the door. She punched at it a few times as if unable to get it to work. An exasperated sound came from her. Fräulein Schweinhund! She kicked at the door with one front leg. German technology! They said it as much gooder. Nine, I say, nine! She ripped the keypad off the wall, dropping it to the floor, and then kicked it away. This caused the doors to open on their own. Gretchen gave a little shrug. Oopsies! She led Pam into the warehouse. A green bug in a blue jumpsuit came sauntering by. It had a leather pouch hung from its belt, filled with all kinds of tools. The repair bug got busy replacing the panel. The warehouse looked more like an oversized hangar. As far as Pam could see were huge bins filled with all manners of devices. Each bin could hold a house or two. The first bin had a few axes, some anvils, an acrobatic set, and some armchairs. Everything was just in a big pile. Ugh, my cat is messing things up again. Gotta hang on to her. Pam saw a Navy plane sitting in the back of the bin. It looked like a three-seater, a dive bomber from World War II. The paint looked relatively new. Why does that plane remind me of something? Ox, don't ask. 1947 was weird year. Many visitors who acted like they didn't want to visit. And Gretchen gave the airplane a rude gesture with one claw. The next bin held books and boxes and bats, balls and band equipment. Pam noticed there were boxes and boxes of batteries. In one corner was a huge, shaggy looking creature. Pam looked close. That looks like a Nein, shh, no sprechen. Gretchen held one claw up to her mouth. Don't wait that thing. Not nearly as cute as on TV. Pam whispered, Why do you have a bear in your warehouse? TV show. Young boy with cute cuddly friend. I thought it would be fun. Killed 6 technicians. Very bad messy mess. They moved on to the next bin. Gretchen looked up into the third bin. She moved a few items around and then turned to Pam. No Cassavetes in here. She looked around to be sure no one was listening. By the way, what is a Cassavetes? It's not a what, it's a who. Sam Cassavetes is a farmer that went missing 2 or 3 days ago. Oh, person! We must be checking P then. Gretchen went scurrying along the bins. Pam began to think this whole endeavor was a waste of time. She had to run to keep up with her host. It dawned on her she was accepting her situation very well. As they were looking in the pea bin, Pam spotted a pile of canned goods. She looked at the label. Possum in gravy? This should be in the O bin. Gretchen looked at Pam and then at the cans and then back at Pam. But it's possum. Yes, but possum is spelled with an O. Oh, why? Gretchen gave Pam a look that was hard to fathom, but just might have been anger or maybe curiosity. Because it's one of those weird words that you can't look up in the dictionary because you can't find it because it's spelled weird. I don't know. They made their way to the H bin, followed by the E bin. Gretchen finally gave up. Come to think of it, we don't abduct humans. Too much trouble, like Yogi. What about that airplane? Ha! Those boys was out of gasoline and in much trouble. That was much more like rescue. Gretchen rolled her eyes at the memory. It's been 71 years, ja, and we still can't get those boys to go back home. Nein. Gretchen shook her head. We fed them, and next things I know, they say nein, not leaving no more. Pam felt just a whole lot disappointed not being able to find Mr. Cassavetes. Well, I would like to thank you for the help and the meal. You can't think of some other group that might check with. I really need to find Mr. Cassavetes. She looked around. Uh, can I get a ride back to my bedroom? Gretchen snapped her claws and said, Summon those gray devils at once. There was nobody around for her to tell, but she said it as if there should be. After just a few moments, the Greys showed up. Gretchen looked at them and asked, One of you Zumnaren Hulton didn't happen to snatch a human a few days ago, did they? Ja? She eyeballed them as if they were on the menu. The Greys all shook their heads and tried to look innocent and inedible. Several moved back behind their companions. That would be a 9 then. She turned back to Pam. Do drop by again and visit, ja? Next week we're having hamburgers and schnitzen. All week. She snapped her claws. Yummy. She got a contemplative look on her face. I will ask around. Maybe somebody know your Cassavetes, ja? Pam looked at the Greys. One held up a wand, and Pam went limp. She awoke in her closet. The door seemed to be stuck. One of the Greys was banging and shoving on it. Finally, it popped open, and Pam was floated across the floor and dumped onto her bed. Al woke up and looked around the bedroom. What was that? Did you say something? Paula didn't even open an eye. Must have been that dream I was having. Something about aliens and Pamela. She went into outer space. Must be too much TV again. Paula fell back onto her slumber. Pam looked around her room. It felt good to be home again. She glanced at her cell phone. Oh man, it's 5:20 in the morning. She had to get up at 7 and get ready for school. This just isn't right. She buried her head under her pillow and tried to force sleep to arrive. Chapter 3. Monday. A bright light flooded the room, and Pam immediately went into her defensive mode. Get back! I know Kung Pao! She had her fists up with her eyes still closed. That's Kung Fu. Kung Pao is a chicken dish. Paula stood by the window. You're running late again. You have 5 minutes to get dressed and head to school. Paula started out the door. And stop watching all those sci-fi shows. I had the weirdest dream last night. Pam rolled out of bed and onto the floor. As she ran down the stairs, headed to the door, Paula shoved her lunch sack, backpack, and a cup of coffee into her hand. Be home by 6. We're having a special guest for dinner. One of your dad's business associates or something. She then tried to smooth Pam's hair out with one hand. Pam was in her pickup and driving away before the words hit her brain. Home by when? What was for dinner? Pam had to work the shift lever while trying to hold her coffee. She set the cup on the dashboard and shifted into second, then grabbed the cup as it slid across the dash. Put it back in time to shift into third, then caught the cup as it slid off the dash heading for her lap. Just as she was taking a sip, it was time to stop at a red light. Parking in what was now considered her spot across the street from her school, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Oh, Lord, I look horrible. Her eyes were ringed by dark circles. Her hair stuck out in all directions. As she stepped out the door, she noticed she had on one boot and one tennis shoe. Then she saw her shirt was on inside out. Glancing at her watch, she had no time to deal with any of this. Pam stepped through the door just as the bell rang. Mrs. Grampus looked at her errant student. No food or drinks in the class. Pam looked at the coffee cup in her hand. Without hesitation, she put the cup to her lips and threw her head back. The coffee went in her mouth and down her throat. It was a good thing Paula had put some ice in to cool the drink down just a bit. The caffeine and the sugar went to Pam's brain and started things moving. She started to comprehend what was going on about halfway through the class. So don't forget to have them ready by Wednesday, Miss Grampus said. Pam was torn between asking the teacher to repeat what it was she wasn't supposed to forget or asking one of the other students later that day. Jackie Springheel handed Pam a note as she stepped out the classroom door. It said, Wednesday we have a special guest coming to class, so we are to be at our best behavior and to not set anything on fire. Jackie was still suffering, if suffering is the right phrase, from her encounter with the giant man-eating onion that also ate girls and women. Pam awoke with a start when Mrs. Goblin called her name. Without thinking, her mouth got busy. That was July 15th, 1799, when the French forces overran the fort at Rosetta and discovered the stone buried inside one of the walls. Pam opened one eye and looked around the room. Most of the other kids didn't think anything of her answer. Mrs. Goblin did wonder how a C student could suddenly know so much about obscure events from history. Either she's cheating or her grades are about to improve, the teacher mumbled under her breath. Pam hoped this was the right answer to whatever the question had been. By noon, Pam was exhausted. She didn't think she could get any tireder. She sat down on the bench, opened her lunch bag, pulled out her peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and fell asleep. The sound of her phone ringing brought Pam out of her slumber. She held the sandwich up to her ear. "This is the bag company. How might I—" She now had peanut butter in her ear. The cell phone was still ringing. Pam got it up to her ear and then switched ears so she could hear. She now had peanut butter deep inside her ear. "Miss Bogus, this is Hildy. Some guy says he needs to see you as soon as possible." Pam looked at her watch. Uh, 15 minutes. No, wait, I'm in school. No, ask him to come back at 4, this afternoon. Pam was on her feet heading to class. With any luck, she'd get there in time. Hildy continued. "He says he'll wait." This sound of Hildy rolling her eyes came over the phone. "Okay, that's cool. Have him wait in my office." "No, wait, no, in the coffee shop." Pam was almost to the door of the school. "Gotta go, bye." Pam ran for the home ec class. Pam carefully opened the door and slipped through. The class was all gathered around the front counter looking at something Mrs. Sandtiger was doing. Pam stepped to the back of the crowd and tried to act as if she'd been there the whole time. Jackie Springheel whispered in her ear, "I answered present for you when Miss Sandtiger called your name. I hope you don't mind." Pam smiled to show her appreciation. "And that's why you never put this stuff in your mouth, no matter what you see on YouTube." Miss Sandtiger set the empty jar of cinnamon back on the counter. There was red powder trickling from both nostrils and all down the front of her apron. Her voice was raspy, both eyes were bloodshot, and she had a bottle of water in both hands. The class was all going ooh and ah. Jackie held up her hand. "Can you do that again? Some of us missed, well, we didn't see everything." "I wish I could. Well, actually, no, I don't, but I can't. For some odd reason, there seems to be a cinnamon shortage right now. All the stores say they're out." Miss Sandtiger had an odd look on her face. "Okay, now for today's project. I got this from a good friend of mine in the Culinary Arts Secret Society that I belong to." She held up a bag of seashell pasta in one hand and a jar of barbecue sauce in the other. "We will be making barbecued pasta surprise." Most of the class groaned. Pam had a thought fight its way into her mostly unconscious brain. It stepped out from her mouth unbidden. "Is this friend of yours named Techno Chavez by any chance?" Miss Sandtiger had a surprised look on her face. "Why, yes, it is. Do you know Mr. Chavez?" "He works for me, well, no, he works for my uncle as a barista and technical wizard and all-around problem solver." Pam hoped that made sense. This was when she realized that her pasta and sauce were in the bed of her pickup. As Pam was about to say something, Jackie shoved a paper bag into her arms. "I noticed you didn't bring the supplies, so here, I have extra," she whispered. As Pam managed to stumble and stagger around the track, she longed for 3:30 so she could head home and sleep. Maybe just a few hours, like 10, and then see about her homework. Looking up from her thoughts, she saw that she was the only one still on the field. A quick check of the time showed it was already 3:35. Ah, time to go home. Pam opted to skip the shower and headed straight for her home. As she was throwing her school bag onto the passenger seat, she remembered something about somebody waiting at the office. "This isn't fair. I'm not even an adult yet, and I already have to work." Whining was no longer her thing, but she was getting a bit close. The drive to the office got her awake, just a bit. She always looked forward to seeing the gang, even the ones who were a bit weird, like Hildy and her sister Hilda, and Mikey Baba Ganoush. Carol Munchausen and her menagerie of clients. Come to think of it, just about the entire bunch were kind of weird. Pam got to thinking maybe she fit in too well. Pulling into the dirt parking lot, she saw the Civil War ghosts were out doing drills. They were marching back and forth, and their uniforms looked closer to uniforms than usual. Come to think of it, there seemed to be a lot more soldiers than before. Next to the porch stood several officers from both sides. They mostly looked in one piece, although one man was holding his head under one arm. Sergeant Dingleopagus was there as well. His 1960s dress uniform looked out of place. Pam walked over and stood next to Lieutenant Brambleberry. "Ah, Madame Bogus, you truly look spectacular today." He bowed and swept the ground at his feet with his hat. Pam began to think just maybe the lieutenant needed glasses. Her sweat-soaked outfit looked just this side of awful. "Lieutenant, you have company today?" "Yes, ma'am. We have been invited to participate in a grand reunion in Laredo, Texas, to commemorate the battle that took place there on the 18th of March, 1864." He pointed out the officer standing beside him. "These fine men will be accompanying us along with their units." Then the lieutenant whispered, "We kicked their posteriors quite well that day." He smiled at one of the officers in blue, who kind of smiled back. True, we do have over a month to get there, but I'm afraid we will be doing this on foot." Now, Sergeant Dinkalophagus was kind of conspicuous in his Vietnam era dress uniform. They invited me to go along, seeing as I was in the army as well." Pam could see Sharma had given Dan a haircut. He looked as if he'd lost some weight. This got Pam to wondering, what all did ghosts do? They ate, they drank, they slept even. Pam wanted to get some of her spirit friends to sit down and tell her everything. She was working on a book on ghosts, but so far she only had 2 pages. "Y'all look spectacular today." Pam hoped this wasn't an appropriate compliment. The officers all turned towards Pam and bowed. The one with his head under his arm nearly dropped it. "Let me see if I can fix that for you." Pam stepped up behind the major. She rummaged in her bag and found a tube of stupid glue. She placed it on the porch railing. There was a rock that looked like it would do the job. Pam grabbed it and began slamming it down on the tube of glue. The stupid glue tube was nothing but a memory. Dan, or Sergeant Dinkalophagus, would you do the honors?" Dan looked at Pam and then the glue and then the major. A light came on. He picked up what was now a tube of ghost glue and removed the top. Stepping up behind the major, Dan dribbled glue all around the opening to his neck. He then lifted the major's head and stuck it down firmly on the glue-covered opening. After making sure the glue had set and managing to unstick his fingers, Dan stepped back and admired his work. The major put his hand up to hold his head in place, but then found his head was now firmly stuck to his shoulders. "I must thank you, young lady." He bowed, but only a bit, not trusting his head to stay put. His voice was a bit raspy, having been cleaved in twain and then glued back into place. Captain Chapman of the Texas 42nd Cavalry Unit saluted Pam in his finest manner. He grasped her hand and bent forward to kiss it. His lips wound up touching his gloved hands on the other side. The captain had taken her up on visiting the Civil War ghosts, especially seeing as they were now running their very own illegal nightclub. Illegal, since nobody had bothered to see about getting a license. Pam felt she owed him a lot, since he was very instrumental in her still being among the living. It felt so weird when his head passed through her hand. It was all she could do to keep from rubbing it. Pam did her duty as the acting head of the bag and watched the soldiers march back and forth. She felt very conspicuous dressed in her gym uniform. Pam hoped this was sufficient, since there was somebody waiting to see her inside. "If y'all will excuse me," Pam did her best to curtsy. Her sweat-stained gym outfit was inappropriate for the job. She just kind of pulled the hem of her t-shirt out and pretended like it was a dress. All the officers gave her a nod or a bow, and Dan opened the door for her. Inside the office, Pam saw there were a lot of folks waiting on staff members. Hildy was behind one of her usual magazines, Home Loading Artillery Shells. Pam leaned in close. "Which one is waiting for me?" From behind the magazine came, "He's in the library." Oh, okay. Carry on with what you're doing." Pam hoped this would get the receptionist to do something, but it didn't even elicit a glance. Walking into the coffee shop library, Pam saw a rather large, portly man standing at the counter. He was dressed in a white Chef Boyardee hat and a white smock. He had on black pants. There were a few dangerous-looking stains on his uniform. The man was in deep conversation with Eddie in regards to the proper use of snails when making sandwiches. Prince Wapo was laying on his back with all 4 feet in the air. If not for his tail flicking back and forth, he would have looked dead. He had plopped down in the middle of a book on Italian cuisine. You wanted to speak to me?" Pam asked as a way of introduction, as she all but slumped into a chair. Eddie took one look at Pam and grabbed an extra large coffee cup. It had 2 handles, one on each side. Otherwise, nobody could heft it. No one except Mr. Armstrong, who he had his own special cup that made this one look small. The man turned his full attention on her. "My name is Maurice Lechat. I am the head of I am the head chef at Chez Incontinent." He said this with a very heavy French accent. "I have a situation that demands immediate attention." He looked around at several of the staff who were trying to act like they weren't trying to listen in. "Is there somewhere more private we can speak?" When Eddie set the coffee cup down in front of Pam, the prince flicked his tail and the tip went into the cup. It came out and splashed coffee around like a used paintbrush. Pam wound up with coffee all down the front of her gym outfit. It went well with the stains already there. Pam thought about his request. Her office was no more. It had fallen into the basement, along with several thousand police reports. Now the construction crew were building a second staircase going into the basement where her office used to be. Even though the former office was only 30 feet from the main staircase, in the basement it was several blocks away. Just go back and read any of the first several books to get the full picture. Yes, the basement is too big, but I'm not going to talk about how it's 10 times or maybe 20 the size of the structure on top of it. The dining room was being used by Naomi Cuthbert until she could adjust to living in the world 20 years after vanishing into a bowl of water. There was one office left in the basement, but it was 20 feet down and then 10 feet back up to get to it. If you find this confusing, from the first floor down to the basement is 20-foot trip. The new office had been built like a 2-story apartment building. This meant more stairs going back up. In other words, it was a bad design. "I know. Come with me." Pam started walking back out to the receptionist desk. She turned and went past Hildy and walked down the hall. Next to Cassandra's office was the one and only bedroom that still had a bed. There was a bed in the dining room and a couple in the attic, but this was still the only actual bedroom with a bed in it. Pam knocked and then opened the door. She had offered the dining room to Naomi because the yard goat considered the bedroom was his. There was a bed, a nightstand with a lamp, and a chair in the room, and that was it. Pam offered the chef the chair and then sat on the edge of the bed. The bed looked so inviting. She thought longingly about just curling up and all is missing. I can't be expected to make waffles au gratin without my camembert, now can I? He crossed his arms as if to say, so there. Pam had no idea what he was talking about. So you're missing all your camembert? She wondered what that was. And you want the bogus anomalous group to find it for you? Sacre bleu, indeed. That and all my Taleggio and my Roquefort. Okay. Pam had no idea where this was going. The chef was missing a bunch of weird sounding ingredients. Some of your cooking stuff is missing, and you want us to find it for you? Tres bien! At once, if you could. The chef had pulled off his Chef Boyardee hat and was crumpling it in his hands. He looked close to tears. We'll get right on it. Pam tried to think what to do next. She then scoured her foggy brain, trying to think who she could pawn this assignment off on. Give me your name. Oops, I'll need to visit your restaurant and have a look. At once. Come with me. I give you a special tour of the kitchen. He was already on his feet, his crumpled hat back on his head. It hung over one side now. Pam had no intention of going anywhere but to bed, so she followed the chef out the door to the parking lot. There, parked next to the cement truck that was still stuck next to the mansion, was a 1973 Citron food truck, painted lime green with orange stripes. I'll follow you over so you won't have to bring me back. Pam didn't want to be seen in anything quite so gaudy. Chef Chat took some time getting the vehicle going and then had to wrestle the gear shift into operation. He managed to get going and Pam followed at a discreet distance. They convoyed over to the ritzier part of town. The parking lot to Chez Incontinent was mostly empty. It's Che Incontinent, not Chez. Che. I don't speak French, darn it. She parked close to the front door in case she had to run from some unknown girl eating monster. She left her door unlocked for the same reason. Once inside, the place was ripe with atmosphere. The lights were dim, and every table had a Chianti bottle with a candle sticking from the top. The tablecloths were checkered, and the air was thick with the smell of food. Real food. Something Pam thought she had until now. This way, the chef led Pam into the back of the restaurant. The kitchen was as big, if not bigger, than the dining room. There were shelves covered with food making equipment that Pam could only guess as to how they worked. The center was occupied by what looked like 10 of the biggest stoves on Earth. Pots and pans hung from the ceiling. Chef Chat had a look of love on his face as he looked around his domain. Here is where it all comes together. This is my life, my love, my world. He let out a sigh. So, where were the missing things that went missing? Pam had grabbed her notebook and camera. This way. He led her over to a giant walk-in refrigerator. There were dozens of shelves holding all the things needed to make world-class dishes. Several were empty. Here is the missing ingredients, or rather, what is no longer here. The cheese shelf. A tear rolled down one eye. And when did you notice the cheese all disappear? Pam took a photo of the empty space. Over the course of the last few weeks. One day these shelves were bristling with every cheese known to man. Then it was all gone. He sniffed. Pam felt as if her lack of sleep was affecting her reasoning ability. Wait a minute. You used up all the cheese over the last few weeks. She felt as if she had already solved this case. Yes, but we tried to buy more and there was none to be had. Chef Chat looked at Pam with hope in his eyes. Please, you must find out where all the cheese has gone. A thought came into her head, unrequested. The other night, when Paula had made cabbage pizza, she'd said something about running out of mozzarella. Mozzarella was cheese, right? Pam wrote this down. She took a few more photos, one of her and the chef together. Let me make a few phone calls and see what we can do. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. He grabbed Pam's hand and kissed it several times. This will be the ruin of my beloved restaurant if you cannot find me my cheeses. He picked up a pan with a sad look on his face and hugged it to his chest. Pam jumped in her truck and started the engine, but she sat there thinking. Pulling out her cell phone, she did a quick search on the internet, then dialed a number. After a few rings, it was answered. International House of Cheese. How may we help you? The voice sounded a bit hesitant. Pam cut to the chase. Hello, this is Inspector Bogus. With the Bogus Anomalous Group, I am calling to inquire as to your cheese situation. That sounded a lot better inside her head than over the phone. Oh, gee, just a minute. Let me place you on hold just a second. One teeny second. The line went quiet. Pam could hear the theme music to Exodus playing as she waited for somebody to come back on. She awoke as her head bounced off the steering wheel. Huh? What? Where was that? Pam lifted the phone back to her ear just as somebody came on the line. Inspector Bogus. I'm Randy Cowshed, CEO and EXO of the International House of Cheese. How might I be of assistance? His voice gave out a little of worried vibes. I'm calling in regard to the sudden and unexpected cheese shortage that seems to have hit town. Pam thought that sounded way too sanctimonious. Oh, that. There was a long pause. See, we only distribute the product. We don't have any control over its delivery from the manufacturers. He took a long breath. It would seem as if there is no cheese to be had anywhere. Anywhere? Like the whole town? Anywhere as in the whole country. Mr. Cowshed sounded as if he were crying. I've called everyone I know, trying to track down so much as a wheel of cheddar. Nothing. It's the end of the world. It sounded as if he had begun to cry. Maybe other countries. Pam tried to sound positive. I have a call into Canada. They say they have one wheel of moose cheese left, and it's going to the highest bidder. It's the end of the world. Now he really was crying. Please, sir, get a hold of yourself. It's not that bad. Or is it? Pam thought about all the things that she liked that came with cheese in them, like pizza and cheeseburgers and mac and cheese. Everything that tasted good. Rest assured, the Bogus Anomalous Group is on the case, and we won't rest until we've found out what's going on. Pam wrote down all the information Mr. Cowshed had on his distributors and how to contact them. This was turning into a huge problem if you like to eat. Pam got home and walked into the house. She sat down on the couch and fell asleep. Paula shook her. Wake up, dear. The Harknesses are here. Pam looked around her. The room was full of people she didn't know. Why don't you run upstairs and put on something a bit less athletic and less sweaty? Paula implied with her eyes. Pam was still in her PT outfit. Pam felt very uneasy sitting in a room full of people she didn't know and in a dress, no less. Paula had insisted. Pam thought it odd that her dad's business associate would come over on a Monday night, but then she wasn't all that sure what her dad did for a living. She knew he went to work every day and he worked in an office, but he also spent time in a workshop. Hadn't he said something about a laboratory a few times? He'd received some kind of an award last July for some kind of an innovation that he'd come up with that really pleased his boss. But what exactly he did was beyond Pam. She had acted happy and nice to everyone so Paula wouldn't have any ammunition to use on her tomorrow. She had no idea what was going on. There were 5 Harknesses. There was the father and the mother, and 2 young girls that looked exactly alike and were way too young to be talking to Pam, but this didn't stop them from doing so. They both looked like little versions of their folks. Pam had thought there was only 4 Harknesses until she saw the 2 men were also identical twins. She noticed the wife looked an awful lot like the men as well. Ever since Hilda and Hildy had both wound up working at the bag office, Pam had discovered a deep distrust of twins. She wondered why she never ran into twin ghosts. The twin that was either the father or the twin that was either the father of the twins or the brother-in-law to the mother of the twins was talking to Paula in the kitchen, while her dad, Al, that is, was talking to the other twin and the mother. Pam had tried to surreptitiously listen in, but the twin girls kept getting in the way. They asked a lot of questions like, what do you do at the bag company? Or, are you really psychic or are you just fake like those commercials? And, can you read our minds? Things like that. Pam managed to evade most of the questions with vague answers as she listened to her dad and the 2 visitors talk. I was surprised when you bought the company. This was from her dad, followed by some mumbled answer from the guy. I didn't even know it was for sale. This was also her dad. The woman said something like, kept it a secret for financial reasons. She kept glancing suspiciously at Pam. Every once in a while, Pam thought she heard her name being mentioned, like as in, is your daughter Pamela really psychic? Or, do you think she can read minds? Pam felt a bit weirded out, being talked about by total strangers. Pam was worried about what was going to be served for dinner. She hoped it wasn't rice and beans. There was actually food on the table. Pam sat squeezed in between the 2 girl twins, one on each side. She ate, but had no idea what was on her fork. Once or twice she caught herself falling asleep. Sometime around 10, Pam was released from the gathering and stumbled up the stairs to her room. Not even bothering to undress, she fell onto the bed and was out. Pam awoke to the feeling of not being alone. She looked to the side of the bed, and there they were. Oh, come on, I just got to sleep. Her voice froze in her throat as the gray waved the wand over her head. They dumped Pam on the floor in front of a row of thrones. Thorns. I'm going to start over with that one. The Greys dumped Pam on the floor in front of a row of thrones. Each throne was bedecked with all manner of swords and daggers and knives and pointy things. Four of the thrones were big enough to accommodate an elephant. The one in the middle was twice as big. Pam could just make out the soles of shoes sticking out past the ends of the seat cushions. Huge shoes. "What brings you to our royal presence?" came from a very loud and hostile sounding voice. "It was those gray guys. They brought me here." Pam managed to get into a sitting position. "Do not mock us. There will be consequences." The voice boomed. Pam got up onto her knees to see who was making all this noise. Then she got to her feet. She had to look down to see who was speaking. Pam noticed she was only wearing one shoe. To keep from falling over, she pulled the shoe off, and when it stuck in her pocket, went to stick it in her pocket. Seeing as she was wearing a dress, she had no pockets, so she had to hold it in her hand. Lined up in front of her were five of very short, very wide creatures. They each had on some kind of a chainmail outfit and a helmet that looked a lot like what the Vikings were supposed to wear until they had learned that Vikings did not embellish their helmets with cow horns. But these guys did. They each had horns sticking out on either side of their heads. The guy in the middle had four, making his helmet look a bit odd since none of the four were the same size or shape. Their faces were barely visible, what with all the hair sticking out in every direction. What looked like beards turned out to be just really huge mustaches. The torsos were covered in ancient looking body armor. All kinds of studs, jewels, and embellishments were strewn about their chests. The lower parts of their bodies were covered in battle kilts, and these and then there were the feet, which were very large for such small bodies. The thrones were all equipped with convenient cup holders. One held a TV remote. The guy on the very end was holding a loudspeaker. Pam discovered she towered over her interrogators. She smiled to try to ease the tension. This called all of the throne sitters to scoot back. One grabbed the handle of his sword. The guy with the loudspeaker brought it up to his lips, but he didn't say anything. Pam went ahead with what she hoped was the right line of thought. "So you guys are aliens, right?" "Watch what you call us. As far as we're concerned, you're the alien here," the guy with the loudspeaker said, but he didn't use the device. His voice was kind of squeaky. Pam tried a different line. "My name is Pam Bogus. I'm looking for Sam Cassavetes, who disappeared from his farm last week. I would really appreciate any information you could give me." "Off with her head!" yelled a creature sitting on the right of the center throne. Pam looked at him, and he tried to slip away by squeezing through the gap in the back of his throne. "Look, I'm not looking to start a fight. I just want Mr. Cassavetes back. I'm not saying we know anything about it, but if we did manage to return him, what's in it for us?" This from the guy to the left. Pam thought about this. What could she offer that might be of any value to these men from, she was assuming, since they had all mustaches, people from some other planet. She was also assuming they were from some distant star system. What did she have of value? She hadn't planned on having to pay a ransom. "I would be eternally grateful, and the bogus anomalous group would be there to help should we want gold." This from one of the guys to the right. "I don't have any. That place in Fort Noxious, or whatever, it's supposed to be filled with gold." This game from the right to the middle throne. "I don't own any of that gold, and besides, haven't you heard? There's no gold in Fort Knox." Pam had just learned this from listening to Strange Things with Chris James. on her computer. "We want gold or else," the middle guy said. "Or else what?" Pam wasn't feeling all that brave, but she was very tired and this was causing her to act different. The guys on the thrones all started whispering back and forth. Finally, one of them said, "Or else we won't tell you who has, or that is, might has, or have this Cassavetes tape." Pam had a bit of inspiration. "So you don't actually have Mr. Cassavetes, and you're not sure who does?" "Well, not in so many words, but yes, we don't," the guy on the far end said. Pam thought back to October of last year. She, as well as her minion Sarah, had a run-in with a character named O'Bunion, a leprechaun that had lost his pot of gold. As a reward, he had begrudgingly handed over 2 handfuls of gold coins that were still stashed under the back seat of Pam's pickup. She had tried to give the gold to her uncle, since at the time she was on the clock and therefore it belonged to him. When her uncle refused to take the gold, saying that she had earned it, Pam had tried to deposit it in her bank, only to be told the bank didn't take gold. After that, Pam had simply left it in her truck. "I have some gold. I'm not saying how much, but it's yours if and when you return Mr. Cassavetes back safe and sound to his family." She put her hands on her hips and tried to look stalwart. After much discussion, the 5 agreed to Pam's terms. Pam felt she was getting the short end of this deal, but she didn't know what else she could do. "Send in the scribe," the guy on the far left said. A short creature with all the same looks, except he didn't have any jewels encrusted on his armor, came walking in. He had a shoulder bag that drug on the floor behind him. He presented himself to the group on the thrones. A lot of whispering went on, and then he pulled out a sheet of paper and he began writing on it. He was using a felt tip pen from the 60s. After much scribbling and a few strike-throughs, the scribe handed the sheet over to the guy in the biggest throne. He, in turn, handed it to the guy on his right, who did the same. The last guy held out the document to Pam. Pam looked at what amounted to a contract between her and them, saying they got her gold once she got Mr. Cassavetes back. She was about to sign when she said, "Do I get a copy of this?" This brought on an immediate argument. The guy on the far left hand throne told the scribe to make a copy, to which the scribe said something with "your mother" in it. The guy on the throne pulled his sword and shook it at the scribe. The scribe finally left the room, only to return a short time later. He brought a second sheet of paper. He got busy copying the first document word for word, including all the mistakes and strike-throughs. He handed the document to the guy in the middle, who handed it to the left, until finally Pam did get her copy. She signed both pages and then handed one to the guy on the left, who handed it to his right, etc. The scribe wound up pulling the copy from the guy in the middle throne, putting it into his shoulder bag. "Well, it's been a long day, so if you could get me back home." Pam felt her body go limp. Pam was placed in her bed. The copy of the form she had signed was still in her hand. She wanted to just go back to sleep, but didn't want to lose the contract or whatever it was that she had signed. Scooting over to the bedside table, Pam was about to put the paper in the drawer when a bunch of grays came walking from the closet. "Oh, no, you don't. I'm not." And that's it for this week. Tune in next week for the exciting next installment of The Bag Company. UFOs Attack the Bag Company, I should say. Hope you're enjoying it so far, and hopefully you'll continue enjoying it. Till next time for story time, this is Chris James. Later.